It's recording.
Call to order the meeting of the Dana Point Financial Review Committee, Tuesday, January 28th. Take a roll call and just say everyone is here. Any preference? We're all here. You need to take a roll call?
I'll take a roll call.
Okay.
When I call your name, please answer with here or present. Member Vixoric?
Here.
Member Federico?
Here.
Member Frost?
Here.
Member Orlando? Here. Member Denny?
Here.
For the record, all members of the Financial Review Committee are present.
Okay. That brings to public comments. Do we have any public comments?
There are no public comments at this time.
Seeing no public comments, we'll close public comment. Move to new business portion of the agenda, which is item 1, organization of the Financial Review Committee. A, election of the chair. I'll open up the nominations.
May I ask, Mr. Mayor, is there anyone who'd like to volunteer to be the?
I'll be the chair. I'll volunteer.
I'd like to nominate Ms. Orlando.
Very well. Are you serious?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Then I'll rescind my my volunteering. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, I'll close nominations. All in favor of Ms. Orlando being the chair, say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. Congratulations, Ms. Orlando. Your meeting. Take it away.
Oh.
Oof.
Oh, God. Okay. Seriously? Alright.
Thanks for the heads up.
Yeah, right.
Vice Chair. You guys do this a bunch.
Wow. Okay, so approval of the minutes from the.
You want to open up nominations for vice chair?
Oh, nominations for vice chair. Any nominations?
Jamie Federico.
Any other nominations? Jamie?
I'll do it.
Okay. All right. So we have that handled.
Vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? There we go.
Okay.
All in favor. On to item number 2, the approval of the minutes from October 29th, 2019, Financial Review Committee meeting. Any questions or comments? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay. Item number 3, the quarterly financial.
Grab a second.
Oh, a second.
Oh,
Sorry,
I
I'm not used to
second.
these. Thank you. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
I'll abstain.
Yeah, don't you?
also
Also,
Yeah.
You're not required to abstain even though you weren't there, and so if you would consider voting in favor of it so that the minutes for that meeting don't sit in limbo forever.
Sure.
We'd have a majority. You abstain.
You have a
unless-
majority.
Yeah, you have. You abstain unless you actually know. If you talk to someone who was there, they can tell you what happened, which I didn't. So
Okay.
I'll have to abstain. But
Okay.
that's a way to do it without actually being there.
Okay.
Oh,
that's right.
Why will they sit in limbo?
Because they're not approved, but I guess
They
they
aren't you
are
gonna-
We approve
the
them.
abstentions. Yeah. Oh, you didn't abstain? Oh, I thought.
No,
you
he
abstained.
approved.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. We're good then?
Sorry,
They were good.
I
They were accurate.
think so.
you were there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll shut up.
Are we good to go to the next
I'll
item?
shut up. Sorry.
Okay. The quarterly financial report ending December 31st, 2019. The recommended actions the Financial Review Committee received and discuss the information provided. Does anybody have any questions or comments from this, or do we have a should we do staff report?
Absolutely, do that one.
That would be great.
Yeah.
All right, I will summarize the written word here. Fiscal year to date through December 31st, compared to last year, revenues are up $500,000. squarely half of that involves a property transfer tax receipt we got for one of the resorts that sold, at $251,000. We're expecting also, not shown in here, will be another property transfer tax here in the coming months for the other resort that sold that should be in a comparable amount. So property transfer tax is an all-star this year, but it's not something you project, it's something that happens when it happens. But we get 55 cents for every $1,000 of a property tax or property sale in town, regardless of the property. Just happens when the big resorts sell for $450 million, or it helps out. That's nice to have. On the expenditure side, compared to last year, fiscal year to date December, expenditures are up 2.8 million. Half of that involves the council's action to transfer $1.4 million to the capital improvement fund into the community investment account. That's the bulk of the change. There's also some timing differences in here, but generally that's the main takeaway on the expenditures to date. And I'll go through some more detail as well. And reserves are fully funded. Back on the revenues, fiscal year to date, our hotel tax, TOT, transient occupancy tax, is up, I'm going to say only 1.3%, which is okay, and it's kind of in line with, we've been trying to predict the top of the economy when it comes to hotel stays. We're in good shape though, because we didn't budget as much this year as we actually collected last year, so we're still up on that. But we've got a $12.8 million budget this year. We collected 13.3 last year, and we're up 1.3%. As I've seen in my history of dealing with hotel taxes, those can also churn pretty quickly. So we're in good stead now. We're just keeping an eye on it. Talked to some of the hoteliers, and their bookings for the next coming months look pretty good. And the fact that the Rotary Club just got kicked out of a couple of weekly meetings at the Marriott is also good for us. But hotels may be peaking out, but we'll see. Property tax is on track. We budgeted a 3.2% increase for this year compared to last year, and it's on track to hit budget this year. Sales tax is pretty much on track to hit budget. Close to budget. It might come in a little bit light, but we're not talking a material amount of money. The in lieu property tax, which is money we get from the state because they stole local cities' vehicle license fees a couple 15 years ago, and they made us whole again through a proposition that was put on the ballot by then Governor Schwarzenegger. But we're looking pretty good. So fiscal year to date, it shows $0 collected, but we get those in 2 payments in January and May, I believe. We did just get the payment for January, and you pretty much double that up to get your annual amount. So for the year, even though it's not shown through December, it looks like we'll be about 50 to 60 grand up on budget for property transfer tax, which is good news. Charges for services and license and permits deal for the most part with planning, building, and engineering related revenues that we get associated with development activity. We're at budget at this point in time. However, I always caution with all of these, it just depends on what's going on with development. So these are also susceptible to ups and downs. But at this point, we are halfway through the year. We've collected a little bit more than half of the budget worth of charges for services and licensing and permits. Expenditures, the big one there is year over year, city attorney's up just under $200,000. We've had a onslaught of activity associated with the code enforcement case with a hotel over in Capo Beach, and we've also had a bit of an uptick in activity associated with sober living homes. The council's well aware of all that activity. But we will be going to council with a mid-year budget adjustment report, is what it's referred to, in early March, where we'll be asking for budget adjustments to cover some of the city attorney costs at that point in time. I do want to mention not shown in revenues associated with city attorney work, because we got the check right when we got back from the Christmas break. We did get the $200,000 settlement check from a property down in Town Center, the Volkman property. So we did receive that. Volkman's now clean on all the requirements with the settlement agreement we have with his business. Storm drains is another one that shows higher expenditures this year compared to last year. A couple months ago, we went to council with a contract to repair and fortify the storm drain outlet at Capitol Beach. That was about a $380,000 cost that we hadn't incurred the year before. So that's the big change for that one. Professional services costs for the city, we continue to see higher costs associated with contracting out for overflow work associated with development activity, again, planning, building, and engineering related contracts. Our police contract is coming in as expected. I do want to mention part of the budget process, we talked about the county being in negotiations with the sheriff's union, the deputies union. They did finally settle those contract negotiations a couple months ago. I have a meeting in 2 weeks with sheriff contracts management staff to give us our updated numbers. We fully expect that it'll be within the budget that we had the council approve that contemplated an increase in it. So with that, that's pretty much the gist of where we're at. I guess my main point, and I've said this a lot of times in the past, is we're kind of where we expect to be. I do want to mention one thing that Mark and I have had these discussions. We went through, if you look at our personnel costs for this year, we had expected our annual unfunded liability payment to CalPERS to be up, so we've got that. But we also had a lot of vacancies through the summer. Thankfully, we had Jamie come on our staff over in administrative services, and I think she ran 13 recruitments during the summer months to get positions filled. So if you look at our salaries fiscal year to date this year versus last year, they're flat. But we did have quite a bit of vacancies, which also drove some of the professional services contracts that we had outstanding, that we did have some contract work that we had to contract for to keep up with the workload. So on personnel services, there's no surprises there. And that's all I got. If you have any questions.
How come on the capital improvement fund, the disbursements were down from the prior year? What is different?
What projects are different? I can get you the list of the projects, but capital projects happen when they happen. I'd have to look.
It's a timing issue.
Yeah.
And so it's when we get the progress payment requests from the vendors, when we get the contract let by the council, and then when we actually start making the payments. So we're going to be due a pretty decent sized payment finishing up the current road resurfacing program that's underway. There's still a month's worth of work. Some weather issues have impacted us. You know, you're not supposed to slurry and pave when it's under 50 degrees and et cetera. So
capital projects don't happen like regularly either. They happen
When they happen.
Yes.
Okay.
So you'll see major swings. I mean, $250,000 year over year is really, you're looking at different projects anyway. So you know that comparing them makes a lot of sense. But if you look there's an attachment that has a summary of the projects, the current projects at least. That we've got the same sheet, I believe, for last year as well for the same report. So you can actually see the outlays by project. It looks like this.
Yeah, unfortunately it says one of two at the bottom, CIP projects.
But we didn't
versus
number these
actual.
like we would with the council agenda report where they're 1 through, but we'll
We'll do that next.
So Mike, I wasn't sure on, it's probably, we can talk about it, I suppose, next meeting, but what I sent Jamie was basically a request for a bunch of column changes. And I don't know if that needs to go back to the whole group. You probably haven't had time to look at it. But,
What do you mean
You know,
column change?
just for, my only comment was the narrative, and then you go look at the general fund, I guess, analytics, right? Mike's narrative always references prior year to date actuals. Well, and I don't want us to go spend a bunch of money on reporting, but I'm assuming that's a column you can select to put in the
No,
report.
we've actually, here's an example of, we can give you the prior year reports. Here's an example I'll give you to you.
Oh, because that would be, in my opinion,
That's fine.
like, oh, this is
That's the expenditure side. I didn't print one out for revenues, but
exactly.
As you shall receive.
So I personally think that this is way more valuable than what's in the booklet. That's my opinion. I don't know.
okay. Why don't we add that for the council agenda report? Both the revenue and the expenditure, fiscal year to date comparison to prior year.
And that's why we bring these reports to this group, because over time we want to improve the way we report out quarterly and make sure that we're being as open as we can be in terms of giving the information that's actually meaningful.
This is easier to read. I
We're
would think
talking
for
to
most people.
accountants.
Right.
Great. Anything else from staff? And then an update on onto the next item, the pension liability update for the section 115 trust.
Okay, so there's a report in here and it talks about kind of the history, but just to give you a quick update on where we're at. The council again did set aside $5 million for us to work on funding our unfunded liability, and we've been working on evaluating what are known as section 115 trusts, which is a legal mechanism where we can put the money aside. It is then forever restricted for pension purposes, but it does take, if we just had money set aside in a city account, then any council at any time could make it change the direction of that money to be, even though we've got a title on it today, they can say, no, we want to spend it on some project or something else. So it does lock the money up. So we're looking at a couple different options to set the money aside. One is CalPERS has a section 115 trust separate from their normal invested pension funds that they established this past year, that they're still building. I got an update from them last night that they've got 5 agencies participating, combined $5 million, and they've got a whole laundry list of other agencies that are working through the process to contract with CalPERS for those services, and at which point in time they would then send money. So we're still monitoring that. My concern, sending money into that too soon before it's got legs, if you will, is that there are administrative costs that get allocated to the dollars that are invested in the trust. And right now the state has committed funds to underwrite those costs so that it keeps the administrative costs charged to the investors, if you will, the agencies that are investing in it, artificially low. I want to see real money in there because at some point in time the state's going to pull the plug on that subsidy, and the folks that are invested in the trust will end up paying the full load on it. So we're, I think if we see $100 million in there, would be awesome. $50 million would be plenty. We were hoping a large water agency, we were told a couple months ago, was looking at it, and they would have a sizable investment. And usually when you see one of those types of agencies go, it's not uncommon to see, the ducks following along, so the other agencies. So we're monitoring CalPERS. I've got some meetings set up next month with some of the private providers that we met with in the last 2 years, so we're going to get an update from them so we can have their information available. And then I also mentioned at our last meeting that we had just purchased a product called GovInvest that loads all of the details of our pension liability, our current assets into a model, and then we can play with the model to see the results of different decisions made on how to pay down the unfunded liability. They were ready last week to give me a presentation on it. We were going to get a test drive of our data that we sent them data a couple months ago that they've been loading, and then their actuaries worked with it, and then they turned it over to us and give us the keys. I was sick last week, so we had to reschedule, and I think we're in the second week of February. We're going to get the keys to that, and we can start playing with it. So that's pretty much the update on where we're at. No real hurry. Our money is invested right now. So right now the city's benefiting from it at our typical investment returns. But we do want to pull the trigger on this and get it moving forward. It's not necessarily time critical. I do want to mention to the accountants in the room that Section 115 trusts, you set the money aside and it is restricted for pension purposes. However, when you look at our balance sheet, you're not going to see our unfunded liability go down on the balance sheet. It's not considered paid.
Well, we talked about this last time. That's right.
As long as the money's separate from then actually paying it into PERS, you'll still see an unfunded liability, and then we'll report the balance in the trust as well. But the balance sheet itself will show the liability. Yeah. So that's my update.
Will it still show as an asset then?
The
So it doesn't
Section
show
115 trust, we're working with our, we will be able to report it. It won't be on the balance sheet.
It won't be on the balance sheet. That's okay.
Don't quote me on that though. That's a really good question.
So the $5 million is set aside right now, earning interest, waiting to figure out.
It's earning interest for the general fund.
For the general fund.
Yeah, so the $5 million isn't increasing at this point in time.
Okay, I gotcha. So the interest is kicking over to the general fund, and then at some point you'll deploy the $5 million in whatever trust.
Yeah, so you'll see actually in the very first page of my summary report for the quarterly financials, you'll see the reserves. And we've got a special purpose reserve. It's the right-hand column, first page, $6 million. $5 million of that is the unfunded liability reserve, and then we have $1 million set aside for the general plan update. So instead of creating a bunch of new reserves, we're calling it a special purpose reserve, and we'll work from there.
When does staff think that this will all be settled?
I was hoping to bring something to council by the time we close by our June meeting, when we would be amending the second year of our upcoming 2-year budget. So we'll see.
The goal is this fiscal year.
The goals, yeah, but it's also to get it right. So,
Well, if there's no rush and.
yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
So there's sort of 2 lines of work that come next. One is the strategy piece that Mike talked about using GovInvest, and then we'll come in here and we'll look at all of the different options, and we can all pepper him with questions and think about different scenarios. Once we can come to a consensus on what the best approach is, then it will be looking at PERS, Keenan, PARS, and Stiefel?
No, PFM has a model too. But
so there are really 3 private entities that offer these 115.
PARS is the big dog.
Yeah, and they named themselves as close to PERS as they could for a reason. And then PERS, obviously, and really it's going to be a question of comparing both performance and fees, and that becomes a relatively simple analysis, although it's challenging sometimes to figure out what their fees are
from the private providers.
Yeah, we've heard
Why is it so hard to figure that out? They're not transparent about them, or?
That's what we're hearing from some of the agencies that are participating. So,
yeah, and they a big part of their sales pitch is how successful they are in investing, and you can look at the asset classes that they're investing in. You can compare those fairly easily, and it's it's a matter of there's also risk. So.
Okay. Any other staff reports?
I want to go ahead and mention that long-term financial plan update. I'm in the process of doing that. I was hoping to have it done, but I lost last week. And I also lost my office during the break. We had a recarpeting project, so
That's
which is
right.
normally when I would sit down with no interruptions and quiet time and noodle the whole thing, but I'm in the process of updating my long-term financial plan. I'll be bringing something back shortly. I also want to mention that our community facilities district, this is the Mellow Roost district, that is basically the Strands development. There's $40-some million of bonds outstanding. There were 2 separate bond issues that repaid the developer for the money spent on the public improvements. So the park, there's a slope, the switchback trail, the walkway on the bottom, the revetment, the funicular, and all those things. So the city issued bonds in 2008, and then we issued a tranche in 2013, and then in 14 we issued the final balance, but also paid off the 08s because we got a lower interest rate. Well, they're now in the money again to refinance them at a lower rate, and I'm working with our financial advisor and underwriter to evaluate, and it's basically my issue right now is just throughput. I don't have the capacity personally to get through this, but I think we have a fiduciary responsibility to try and get the lowest rate possible. My direction, which has them all scratching their head, is not to lower the annual Mellow Roost tax on the property owners that pay $25,700 a year in special Mellow Roost taxes to pay off these bonds. My direction is to refinance the bonds and take advantage of the lower rates and shorten the duration. So pay them off earlier, keep the annual assessments where they're at, which we don't have issues with those property owners writing $25,000 checks, and instead of lowering their annual assessments, I'm looking to shorten the term of the bonds from 2045 down to maybe 2042. So,
Mike, how many of those property owners pre-funded the full 30 years worth?
well, it was only on the maintenance tax
Okay.
that they did. So there's a separate maintenance tax as well that they pay. That the city gets the money to help pay for the maintenance costs for those public improvements. So those right now are around $3,000 a year on top of the $25,000. So a couple of those folks did prepay that. So it was an in perpetuity maintenance tax, and there's a very complicated formula that decided how much they were paid. So 3 of them paid almost $250,000 each. One of them literally walked in and wrote a personal check. So that's there as well. Anyway, so I'm working on that, but that'll be something we bring back to the FRC before we go to council when we get the whole plan together.
I'm curious, is there not sort of an intermediary like HOA that would want to analyze this with us, or that it doesn't work that
No, it doesn't.
really? And they're just
okay.
These are city issued debt, even though they are non-recourse to the city. So if all the property owners stop paying down there, the city won't have to write a check. Their properties go into foreclosure. So no, I mean, that's not typically what I've seen. And if we get a handful of those people coming in and screaming at council members, lower my taxes, and the council members have the, obviously they can go either direction, but if I had to read tea leaves with our council, it'd be shorten the duration in this case. But when I gave the direction to the financial advisor and the underwriter, they're like literally scratching their heads. Wait, what are you gonna do? So
That's why I thought it'd be helpful to understand that literally on the maintenance side, some people just prepaid 30 years up front.
Yeah.
That's what we're dealing with in that neighborhood.
well, the other thing
If
you're
it were
dealing with,
another different HOA,
Yeah.
there might be more of a discussion about do we, reduce the payments rather than shorten the
you're
life.
not gonna see. I will be shocked if we were ever to see one of these get to public auction to pay a $25,000 tax bill when these properties, they're on the tax roll, so they're not even market value. On the tax roll, the lowest one's like $7 million, and they run up to $28 million. So if somebody's gonna walk away from, and let something go to a public auction on the courthouse steps for a $25,000 bill,
At the end of the day, you're saving, let's say you're cutting 3 years off the total length, you're saving those homeowners 75 grand.
Yeah.
In ultimately what would have been interest payment,
Yeah.
you know, so. I'm fine with it unless they complain.
well, it's our fiduciary responsibility since we're managing the debt for them. And all of our costs get covered in this.
That was the next question.
They're
Yeah.
100%, they get rolled into the financing, so. One thing to know with government agencies is you've got financial advisors and underwriters out there monitoring every debt issue and constantly coming up to you and saying, hey, I can save you money. I don't care what kind of debt issue it is. You're never gonna find a government agency that isn't aware of the opportunity to refinance to save money. They're all scheduled in computer systems at all these companies, and so, yeah, sorry about that, guys. All right, that's all I got.
Great. Anybody else? Okay. Do we have any member reports? No? Okay, our next regular scheduled meeting is scheduled for April 28th at 6 p.m. in the Public Works Conference Room. And unless anybody has anything else, I think we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Fantastic
Thank you.
job.